I think we have our panel, and we're going to keep zooming along here. Zoom, zoom, zoom. You know, we could have done this all as a webinar, but isn't it nice to be together? We love being together. I have been asked by a number of folks to have copies of the presentations, and we will have them all linked on the web page for the symposium. So we will have that done shortly with the permission of the panelists. If any of the panelists don't want their slides linked, we won't do that, but for those who give us permission, we will. So you'll be able to have access to all of that. Well, we are moving right along. I mean, there is so much richness here. We could spend like days, and at the end of today, everybody's going to want two things. First, they're going to want a PhD in AI, and then they're going to want a drink. So there's a lot of that going on. But I am very pleased to welcome our next round of panelists and also our students, and to introduce our adjunct professor of political science, Sophia Young, who will moderate the panel, and she's going to introduce our students.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Professor Young. I like to be referred to as Professor S. I'm also an alumni of Trinity. I've been here since 2006, and I started teaching in 2009, so I'm built into the bricks. So I want to welcome our panelists, our students, our alum, everybody from outside. And then I would like to introduce the students who will, as President McGuire indicated, will introduce our panelists. Our first student will be Jessica Tomax. She's a senior majoring in biochemistry and minoring in bioinformatics. And she also won the Katherine Johnson Award for Excellence in STEM last year. All right, and our other student is Renee Mitchell. She's a senior, she's a political science major, and she's minoring in psychology, and she holds the LaHart Scholarship.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I am pleased to introduce Professor Renee Cummings of the University of Virginia. Professor Cummings is a 2023 Venture B AI Innovator Award winner. She is the first data activist in residence at the University of Virginia School of Data Science, committed to reimagining the relationship between data and society and redefining the data power structure. Professor Cummings works at the intersection of technology, power, and society, examining the ethical implications of data on society.
Good afternoon. I am pleased to introduce Dr. Stephen Gable, Associate Professor of Philosophy at Trinity. Dr. Gable teaches a number of courses in ethics, social and political philosophy. In today's program, Dr. Gable will discuss the role of AI in spreading political propaganda, disinformation, and conspiracy theories. I am also pleased to introduce Dr. Sita Ramamurti, Professor of Mathematics and the Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences. Dr. Ramamurti led Trinity's development of data analytics minor and now the information technology major. Today she will demonstrate how generative AI models produce human-like text and images.
Thank you so much for that introduction, and let me say it's an absolute honor and a pleasure to be with you at this very auspicious time, and thank you so much, President McGuire, for inviting me. So I'm Renee Cummings. I'm a professor, I'm an AI and data ethicist. I'm also a criminologist and criminal psychologist. I began my career as a journalist, and that career took me on a very, very interesting trajectory. So I would say what I bring to the space of AI is a very interdisciplinary imagination that began with journalism, moved into mental health and criminology and criminal psychology and terrorism studies, learning, and all of that has combined to really give me a very unique appreciation of how we need to engage this technology and make this technology work for us. So when we think about artificial intelligence, this technology has extraordinary promise, and we're seeing that in particular when we think about healthcare, when we think about education, when we think about climate change, when we think about risk and crisis management and our responses to natural disasters. When we think about the promise of this technology and the ability of this technology to transform just about every business model, every methodology, every industry, every discipline now impacted, and the possibilities of this technology is really extraordinary when we think about the kind of progress we can make with this technology. But then there's the other side, the risks. So for us to truly harness the rewards of this technology, we have got to understand the risks. And what are those risks? This technology, because it's built on data, has an extraordinary amount of privilege. And that privilege really lies in the hands of 5 companies. And you can probably guess those companies that own all our data. But where there is privilege, there is that risk of prejudice. And where it's prejudice, we understand how bias and discrimination and stereotypes have found themselves in the space of technology, data, and AI. AI is also about people. And the risks that we are seeing to what this technology can do to people means that we have got to step up to the plate, and we have got to deploy some rigorous and robust protections. This is a case from 2016, very powerful. It's about machine bias. And I have worked in the criminal justice system for many years, and for many years we were using risk assessment tools to determine sentencing, to determine recidivism, which is reoffending. And this study that was done by an independent journalist outfit, ProPublica, revealed that the risk assessment tools that were being used were creating these zombie predictions and overestimating the risks of Black and brown defendants. In this image, you would see the 2 young people. They had a risk of 6 and 8, and the older gentleman risks of 3. When we're talking about risk, what this says is that the 2 young people are more risky than the other individuals whose criminal histories make you realize who is the greater risk. So what this says is there is something very troublesome about the inheritance, those historical effects in our data sets. What this also says is that there's something else about risk, the way we define risk, the way we define danger in our data sets. And what this assessment tool really made us understand was those inherent biases in our data sets. Another example, Robert Williams in January 2020 was arrested in front of his wife and children. The police came to his house, they came with images, they said they saw him on facial recognition technology actually shoplifting at a very high-end store. He was arrested for about 15 hours, he was detained for about 15 hours until one of the officers decided to take a look at his driver's license. This happened in Detroit. What they realized is that Robert Williams was not the individual on those images. What happened in this situation? Extraordinary trauma for this family. What also happened in this situation is that we woke up to the fact that facial recognition technology could be extremely dangerous, and those dangers in particular for women and Black and brown people. When we think about surveillance, and because we're going to have a panel discussion, I'm just going to throw some things out to you because we're having a conversation. When you're thinking about surveillance, you've got to ask yourself, what about my right to know? I need to know where I'm being surveilled. Surveillance also impacts some very critical aspects of identity development: freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, freedom of movement, questions around privacy, questions around the right to be forgotten, big questions. Portia Woodruff, I think about maybe a few months ago, she was arrested again in Detroit, facial recognition technology. The police came to her house, she was 8 months pregnant, and they said to her while she was dressing her kids for school, "We have some images of you. The computer says it is you. You were involved in a carjacking in a gas station, and she's saying to the police, how could that be? I am 8 months pregnant. And they're saying to her, the computer says it's you. She was arrested. She was, of course, detained. While she was there, she was having contractions. Of course, she was also suffering from gestational diabetes during her pregnancy. And when she was eventually released, of course, she had to be rushed to the hospital because there were a lot of health things happening, and now she suffers from post-traumatic stress. False arrest, think about it. False imprisonment. Fourth Amendment violation, the right to be protected from unreasonable seizures. Questions around privacy, questions around civil rights. These are the questions that AI are raising, some very critical questions about who we are, how we define and build our identities, and our relationship between society, our relationship as a member of society, and questions around democracy. AI policing, something that I spend a lot of time talking about internationally. And what we are seeing with these algorithms, and algorithms are the lifeblood of AI. They are built with data, and they are given particular instructions, and those instructions are impacting us every day. As we sit in this space, algorithms have probably made several decisions about us without us even knowing. And what we are realizing with AI and algorithms, questions around power, control, exploitation, monetization, monopolization, oppression, and the ability for our data to be weaponized against us. And this comes to algorithmic decision-making systems. And this is what we're using right now. AI is about excellence. It's about expediency. It's about efficiency. It's about effectiveness. But it's also about undermining agency and autonomy, and undermining and unraveling our approaches to self-actualization, self-determination, democracy. Big questions that we've got to think about. Algorithmic decision-making. What we're seeing is that while we have the potential to do these absolutely brilliant things with this technology is just creating lots of challenges, bumps in the road. And we have got to learn to negotiate that technology. So as we learn to drive, we had to do a test before we got that license, right? If you're going to fly a plane as a pilot, you've got to do a certain test to get that certification. But AI has just descended on us in a particular kind of way, and many of us do not have that literacy or that proficiency just yet. I always say AI is a language, and it is the language of the now, and we have all got to become literate in real time because of the fact that this is the language that we're using. Historical data sets are the data sets that are used to build many of our algorithms. And what we continue to see with algorithmic decision-making systems or automated decision-making systems or data-driven decision-making systems will be very uneven and unequal decisions. And why are we seeing that? Because there are many, many challenges in those data sets. Racial disparities, economic disparities, marginalization, systemic racism. This is something that I like to present. And there are some names when you think about AI and when you think about AI ethics that are very, very important. 3 women, 3 black women, Dr. Joy Buolamwini, Dr. Timnit Gebru, and Deborah Raji. And they woke the world up to the questions around bias and discrimination in many of our technologies, in particular AI. And Dr. Joy Buolamwini, who has a new book that's coming out, and I will give her a plug, it's called Unmasking AI, and I think it drops at the end of the month. And she considers herself a poet of code, MIT graduate. And what happened to Dr. Buolamwini is that she was doing a project using image recognition technology, realized that the camera was not picking up her dark skin, and decided to put on a white mask and realized that she was seen. She was seen as a white mask, not as a black woman. What they presented to the space of AI is this. Up to 77.4% of subjects in mainstream data sets are male, and up to 94.6% are light-skinned male. And you can think about that. And those are some of the historical challenges that we continue to see. We are continuing to see in AI, as brilliant as it is, and amazing as this technology is, it's also very dangerous if we don't bring that requisite level of due diligence and duty of care and understanding how this technology could impact us if we really don't pay attention. So what are we seeing with this technology? It's automating the status quo, it's amplifying discrimination, it's codifying bias, and these approaches could be deeply destructive because they continue to repeat past prejudices. So in my own research, I introduced this concept called data trauma. And it's something that we're seeing in real time. So data trauma is really what happens to you and what you feel when an algorithm makes a decision about you, when you're denied credit, when you're denied housing, when you're denied healthcare, when you're denied a scholarship, when you're denied something and really don't understand why, but someone says the computer made that decision. The computer made that decision. And we can't tell you why. That's what the computer said. As the computer told Portia Woodruff, the computer said it was you. So one of the things, or several of the things that I want you to take away is that historically, different communities have experienced data differently. Different communities have different relationships with data. Data sets do not have the luxury of historic amnesia. Our data sets don't forget. As we continue to use them, we realize the data sets have a memory, and in that memory, trapped in that memory, are past decisions. Many of those decisions that are unjust, decisions that are systemically challenged, and decisions that are just bad decisions. So while we are using data and AI to solve some of the world's greatest challenges, we're also seeing that data and AI opening some of those large wounds. Data, I always say, is suffused with cultural meaning that is independent of its computational meaning. So the numbers are not always what they seem. So we're seeing at the moment, although we're using this amazing technology, this technology is creating major challenges. And many individuals who are interacting with algorithms and AI are starting to feel betrayed by the very institutions that are supposed to protect us. Police, justice system, healthcare, we're seeing it all of these spaces, many individuals who are now the victims of algorithm, the victims of data. And what are we seeing? Data bias, discrimination, data marginalization, data profiling, in particular in law enforcement and national security and defense, and data victimization, where we are being victimized by data that's being weaponized against us. How do we deal with that? Well, of course, we want to bring an ethical perspective. We want to ensure we apply things like accountability and transparency and explainability. We want to deal with questions about trust and questions about public confidence. And for us to do that, you have got to realize that you cannot take data at face value. You have got to interrogate the data. So one of the things that I always say as a criminologist and someone who has worked in homicide investigation for the last 15 years is that in as much as we interrogate individuals who come into our spaces, we have got to learn to interrogate data sets. Data, never free of human judgment. All data has been cooked. There is nothing called raw data. It's a fallacy. All data, not created equally. There's always the appearance of neutrality and this presumption of objectivity that makes us believe that because it's math, and because it's science, and because it's statistics, that it's factual. And we're seeing that that is not so. And remember, because of that historic data set, the historic data sets that we continue to use through this concept of data trauma, what we are seeing is that data has the ability to transmit intergenerational trauma in certain communities. So I'm the first data activist, although I'm a professor at UVA. I'm also their first data activist in residence. And my work really looks at ways in which we need to challenge the status quo and advocate for change using data. So I'm very passionate, as you probably realize, about technology and about AI, and about using AI for advancing humanity, and using AI for uplifting communities, and using AI to ensure we all thrive. And for us to do that, we have got to realize there is no AI without data. So we have got to get to the source. In criminology and sociology, we say we have got to get to the root cause. Data is the root cause. So about equity, data equity, very important. Accountability, transparency. Data is about decision making. That's what we do as data scientists. We want to use data to make the best decisions, the most accurate decisions, the most informed decisions. And for us to do that, we have got to understand the power of data and the power of technology. So much of my work includes public awareness and public education and public information. And I spend an extraordinary amount of time traveling the world, having conversations about data and about AI, doing good data science and doing AI effectively. When we think about data, we have got to think always about due diligence. And when I speak about due diligence, I'm speaking about human oversight, robust safety and security, rigorous accuracy, detailed documentation as to the provenance, the genealogy of that data that you're using. Where did that data come from? Who designed that study? How has it been used? How has it been analyzed? Who is behind this data set? And how are we actually going to use it? So documentation. User information, very, very important if you're working in the data industry. Duty of care. I come from the criminal justice system, and much of my work surrounds due process. Due process is about equity, due process is about fairness, and that is what AI is challenging at the moment: equity, fairness, and justice. And I say that my work is about future-proofing justice. So duty of care is very critical, and it's about ethics, it's about compliance, it's about governance, it's about regulations, and of course, due process. We have realized that digital rights and data rights are now frontiers, new frontiers of justice, because we're speaking about data justice and we're speaking about algorithmic justice, new concepts. And if we are to truly harness the power of this technology, if we are to truly harness the rewards of this technology, we have got to learn in real time to detect, mitigate, and manage those risks. We've also got to understand that there are rights that are being unraveled, rights that are being trampled upon, and rights that we can lose if we don't pay attention to what's happening with this technology. And if we were to get all of that right, it means that we understand our responsibility. And each and every one of us has a responsibility to pay better attention to what's happening with our data, to understand that we need to become literate in real time with this new language called AI, called algorithms, and called generative AI. And if we are to get all of those things right, we are going to do good data science, and we are going to do even better AI. And with that, I thank you.
I just hit this. Which one is it? This one? So you can use. Oh, just that. Okay. Perfect. Okay, thank you. Okay, to build on that theme of the risks of artificial intelligence, I wanted to talk today to kind of limit the scope of misinformation, propaganda. I wanted to focus on the conspiracy theory and the possibility that artificial intelligence could lend greater plausibility to conspiracy theory, which seems to be, at least anecdotally, playing a greater role in our political society. So just to take a look at this for a second, a recent, about 2 years ago, a survey was taken, and the results of the survey were kind of alarming. If you take a look at some of these propositions up here, one, you have 16% of the American population believing all three of these things to be true. That the government, the media, the financial sector are controlled by a group of Satan-worshiping pedophiles. I'll just stop there because it just seems so outlandish. That a storm is coming in which the just rulers will come to remove the corrupt rulers that we have that are responsible for all of these terrible things that we've heard in point number one. And that even the threat of violence, like people who accept this theory, they recognize that it may be necessary, this is what they say, to change society through the use of force, to bring about this storm. So these are some of the key tenets of something called the QAnon conspiracy theory. And if you remember the riot at the Capitol from just a few years back, January 6th, you see the famous photograph. The man in the center is wearing his prominently displayed Q sweatshirt. So the idea here is that conspiracy theory at least seems to be fairly widespread, like people believing these things to be true and willing to act on them. So I wanted to talk just for a moment about the dynamics of conspiracy theory. I follow a specific philosopher here. His name is Brian Keeley, but he makes a couple of interesting points that, first of all, conspiracy theory seems to use errant data as a key feature of its kind of dynamic. So errant data can be, it can be many things, but he identifies two. Unaccounted for data, in which, let's say, some aspect of an event is not accounted for by the official reports about that event. So one example would be, and you might be familiar with this from television shows and movies, but the Umbrella Man from the Kennedy assassination in 1963, this mysterious man who's standing with an open umbrella, roughly at the spot where the shots started to come into the presidential limousine. Now, there is an explanation for that. We won't get into that right now, but conspiracy theories kind of seize hold of something like that to weave it into a narrative, a counter-narrative, if you will. And then number two, contradictory data, some kind of data that doesn't seem to harmonize with the official account. So some people on the same day said, well, we saw 2 people on the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository, not 1. Now, a lot of research has gone into that to establish that there really was only 1, but for the moment, that seems to give the conspiracy theory or theorist a little air with which to operate. So these are kind of the dynamics that we see at work. And I just wanted to show you kind of a low stakes, stakes are pretty high, but thankfully, in a sense, this lawsuit was dismissed. But this goes back to 2021. And it's in Fulton County, Georgia. And there were a group of people who were basically suing to have yet another recount of presidential ballots in the 2020 election, to go over some absentee ballots. And so the ballots were stored in this warehouse in northwest Atlanta. And then on the night of Saturday, May 29th, an alarm went off in the warehouse. And it's a complicated story, but a few sheriffs showed up, started to pull on doors, found one open door, and then this led to the creation of what we could call a conspiracy theory. So these sheriffs were not from the Fulton County, they were from a place called Douglas County, but they were working in a private capacity to maintain security for those who were pushing the lawsuit for another recount. So they came, they found one unlocked door, they themselves took a picture of it. It wasn't open, they just found it unlocked. They opened it themselves, they took a picture of it, and the picture started to go viral, mostly in conservative and right-wing circles, to try to demonstrate like, hey, look at this lax security at best, or there's something nefarious going on, that someone is breaking into the warehouse to try to destroy ballots, so yet the next recount can't take place. So it is a kind of conspiracy theory. It's been described this way in the media. And okay, official explanations soon followed. So in other words, news reporters started to look into this, and they would interview government officials and start to see, okay, well, what went on at this particular time? So first of all, Georgia Public Broadcasting demonstrated that an employee had left the door unlocked, that it wasn't some kind of group of people breaking in, it wasn't a burglary. Vice News, by accessing security camera footage, showed that the sheriffs from Douglas County acting in a off-duty and in a private capacity, they were the ones who opened the door and took the picture themselves. PolitiFact explained the motion-activated alarm as the result of a mouse or a rat or some kind of animal within the warehouse that set off the alarm. And what's interesting about this is that in conspiracy theories, in a way, from what I understand about them, they're never really comfortable with the accidental. The accidental needs some kind of explanation in the mind of a conspiracy theorist. So, the official reports are saying, okay, look, this is just some employee left, didn't lock the door, a mouse set off the motion-activated alarm. So these are the official explanations that one could, try to reference to counter or to check upon the conspiracy theory. Now, the danger that I would like to, and I don't want to just harp on dangers, but the danger that I would like to draw our attention to is that I wonder whether artificial intelligence, using large amounts of data, could, through the use of something called a knowledge graph, so artificially intelligent knowledge graphs, could they be used to try to plug the holes in the conspiracy theory? Could they be used as kind of a resource to make connections that could save the plausibility of the theory? So I just wanted to show you this little, graphic here, but the way it works, and, I'm no expert on this, but I just want to point this out. You have nodes, which are people, places, and things. You have edges, which are these relationships that you can try to build between these things. And so you start to build this kind of, it's almost like those detective programs where you see all these pictures and photographs and pieces of yarn that link it all together. Well, AI can do this, and computer technology can do this. Now, it can be used for laudable purposes, or it might be used for suspect purposes, which is, I guess, what I'm mostly focused on here. So, and what makes this especially interesting is that, going back to the philosopher Keeley here, he points out that conspiracy theories are always trying to connect things that don't really seem to have any relevant or meaningful relationship, but they try to pull them together anyway. And so AI could do this without really evaluating is this a meaningful relationship? It could take accidental relationships and put them together. I'll try to give you an example of that a little bit later. So, this is my low-tech way, based on my low-tech skills, of showing you, two nodes and an edge that relates the two things together. So the elections director supervises the warehouse workers. That would be just like one relationship. And then you could just start building more and more relationships. And AI, using a vast amount of data, could create an entire network of relationships. Unfortunately, it may not distinguish what's relevant from what is not. And that's, I think, where the danger could come in. So I think it's possible that if we went back to this Fulton County case, one could, let's say a bad actor could, take advantage of the knowledge graph to try to establish relationships between the workers in the warehouse, try to find out what their political affiliations are, see if they have any relationships to any of the deputies. There were some deputies from Fulton County who were supposed to be surveilling the warehouse, but they had left at the same time the alarm went off, interestingly. So that just seemed to be an accident. But could the machine find some relationship between, workers in the warehouse or even the director of elections and some of those sheriffs who were mysteriously missing at the moment the alarm went off? Now, that just seemed to be a miscommunication, but AI could try to make something more of this, AI, in other words, could start to pull together different facts and data to try to create a new counter-interpretation to what we hear about in the news reports. So I describe this as the dangers of tenuous connections and plausible conclusions. It's not that, and I think we all kind of see it, it's not that conspiracy theories have to be 100% certain. I mean, otherwise we wouldn't have any suspicion of them to begin with. But all they need to do really is to build enough doubt, to build enough skepticism, to make enough tenuous connections to get a little play going, to get a little buy-in from people in the public. So I suggest here that the AI-powered knowledge graph could draw tenuous connections, and it could put weight on irrelevant relationships. And just to show you, this is just my opinion, of course, but I was reading a recent report about the October 7th attacks, the Hamas attacks in Israel. And so there was an article I was reading, and this was in The Hill, and it was trying to show that, okay, Vladimir Putin is the person who's most responsible for what took place. And so to make this theory work, they pointed out that the attack took place on Vladimir Putin's birthday. And that seems like a rather, you could make a connection, but it seems to be a rather irrelevant connection. But in the absence of knowing those things on our own, perhaps a computer, perhaps AI could easily make that connection, and then next thing you know, someone's running with it. I just quickly show you here that there's nothing new with this kind of technique. We're looking at Joseph McCarthy, who would routinely try to draw the most, tenuous connections between communist sympathy and, let's say, a public figure or someone in the media. And a famous example of this is a television kind of address he gave where he tried to link Edward R. Murrow, a very famous journalist, to some really very weak statements that were being made in some communist newspapers. But the idea was, I'm going to show you that this man is a communist sympathizer, was the strategy. Okay, so I wonder, looking into the next year, 2024, looking to other election cycles coming up, are we in danger of yet another kind of Cambridge Analytica scenario? In Cambridge Analytica, they were able to get a hold of the data of, let's say, 87 million Facebook users. They were able to build personality profiles. They were able to send targeted political messaging to individuals rather than to just everybody all at once. So I wonder if the knowledge graph could be used, for example, to create, for a losing side, conspiracy theories to demonstrate like the election was stolen. We saw this from the last election. Could this be an insurance policy for one of the parties going forward? Or we don't know the other purposes to which it could be used, but I think that campaigns will have a great deal of interest in trying to use such tools if they were made available. So finally, as a final ethical reflection, and I'll tell you something really short, I promise I'll keep it very short, but thinking back to the ethical system of Immanuel Kant, who always argued that we need to treat other people as ends and never purely as means to be manipulated for our purposes. Do these kind of tools, or could these kind of tools transform people simply into means to, how can we put it, further the interests of one political party or one candidate? And I think that is the danger, that we in the public could be manipulated by these kinds of tools. And to reference something that Professor Cummings mentioned, we could lose autonomy here. In other words, we would like to receive information we could trust, to make our decisions when it's time to vote. But would these tools possibly undermine that autonomy? I think Kant would ask that question too. And then finally, just to leave you with a little, there's some works-cited stuff here, but to leave you with a little story very quickly, when I was in graduate school, much to my surprise, a few years after I had taken a specific philosophy course, I learned that one of my classmates was a Russian spy. You know, welcome to DC. It's a DC story. So, you know, the idea was, and I would just put it this way, if that kind of information could have been fed into a computer, like just let's put in rosters of different classes and different people who are together, it would have been possible, let's say someday if I ran for office, for the computer to say, oh, you know, guess what? He was the classmate of person X. I'll leave that name unmentioned today. So therefore, he must be sympathetic to the goals of the Russian leadership, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm thinking that the knowledge graph could present that kind of, you know, distortive possibilities on our political life going forward. So I'll leave you with that. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Yep. Welcome to my presentation, and thank you all for coming back after lunch. That's important. I've titled my presentation, Figures on the Threshold. It's a topic that's taken from a course that I developed several years ago for our mathematics majors. The course is called Ethno-Mathematics. Ethno-mathematics is very briefly the study of mathematical ideas in traditional peoples, that is, indigenous people of places that were discovered and colonized by the Europeans. And in the middle, you see Mathematics Elsewhere. That's the textbook that I used for the class. And then on the right, you see a drawing, and I'm going to link all of them. And Professor Cummings ended her talk by saying it's important to know about languages and algorithms, and that nicely feeds into what I'm going to do in my talk. I give you a very brief overview of formal language theory, and then talk a little bit about what a Kolam drawing is, and then connect the Kolam drawing to the formal language theory, and then touch on generative AI and how it's able to draw these figures. Now, disclaimer, I'm no expert in computer science, no expert in Gen AI, but I'm a math person, so as part of the mathematics major, I studied programming. And so I developed this interest, and I'm very intrigued by how AI has these advanced capabilities. So formal languages are nothing but a set of strings. And then you have what's called rewriting rules that allows you to create new strings from previous strings. So we start with what's called an alphabet. An alphabet is nothing but a set of symbols. And then you have what's called an axiom. So again, please forgive me if it sounds like a class lecture. So an axiom is a starting string. So you combine your symbols and start with a string. The rewriting rules are nothing but rules that are used to create new strings from the one that you started. And the new strings are called outcomes. Okay, so this is the basis of a formal language theory. I'm going to quickly give you an example. So my alphabet is going to be A, B, C. Now, A, B, C are just symbols for us. Okay, a starting string could be just a combination of A, B, C. So I say my starting string is ABB. And the rewriting rules, the way you understand this is that A goes to BC. That means every time you encounter A, you replace it with BC. Okay, replace B with A. Notice the last one says C goes to C. That means C stays unchanged. And so remember my starting string is ABB. So in your mind, I hope you can quickly apply the rule and tell me what the next outcome would be. Yes, BCAA, great students. And then do the same thing to BCAA, apply the rule again, you get this, and so on. So that is formal language theory, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to move from a string of symbols to what we call picture languages. And for that, I'm going to use another example, and you'll quickly begin to see why I use these symbols. So the alphabet would be F, cap F, plus, minus. Now you have to start with a string, and it's a combination of these three symbols, so I'm going to start with F minus F. And then I need to come up with rewriting rules. So my rewriting rules are every time you encounter cap F, replace it with F plus F. Notice the symbol plus stays plus, minus stays minus. So my starting string F minus F, if you apply these rules, becomes F plus F, minus stays minus, the F becomes F plus F. And so that's my first outcome. Again, do the same thing. It gets more complex and more complex. So now the idea is to change these strings into pictures. And so what I do is I have to give the computer commands so that it's able to draw. And way back when they discovered languages, they called it the turtle moves because apparently turtle graphics was developed to encourage children to be creative in the use of computers. So if you can imagine a turtle sitting on a piece of paper with a dirty tail, and then if the turtle is moving with its tail on the paper, because it's dirty, it's going to create a streak. And so that streak is the line that the computer draws. And if the turtle moves with its tail up, then as it's moving forward, it does not draw a line. So that's the background of why it was called turtle moves. So I'm going to use these commands for the computer. So cap F, remember that was one of my symbols of the alphabet. I'm going to say that when you see cap F, move forward by a step length S while drawing a line. So the turtle has its tail flat. Lowercase f, move forward without drawing a line. Plus is turn left, counterclockwise. Minus, turn right, clockwise. So that's the set of commands I give the computer. Now, you have to tell it how much to move. So my step length would be, let's say, 1 unit. So 1 centimeter, 1 inch, 1 meter, whatever. And then it has to turn, and when it turns, you have to tell it by how much to turn. So I'm going to say turn by 90 degrees. And so now, take the starting string, apply these commands, and so what would the turtle interpret my starting F minus F? So cap F means move forward, draw a line. Minus is turn right. Again, F, move forward. Can you picture that in your heads? Good? Good. Now the outcome, the first outcome is a little bit more complicated, but you do the same thing except that the turtle has to stop, turn, and keep going. And so you get something like that, right? Because it's 90 degrees, that's how it looks. Now, I could change D from 90 to, let's say, 135, and I'm getting very excited, sorry. So 135, you know, is not a right angle, but it's skewed, and so you see that the whole thing, the picture becomes like that, and then the outcome again is like this. Now, what does this have to do with Kolam? Right, so the Kolam is a traditional art form of the people of Tamil Nadu in the southeastern region of India. So that's where I come from. And so notice that in the southeastern part, so the women draw these designs on the threshold of homes every single day. And while growing up, I did that too. In front of my home, I would draw these designs, and the women use rice flour or rice powder, and they have a technique using their hands. The rice flour trickles down the middle and the index finger, and then you create the design using your fingers. Of course, in addition to its aesthetic value, because it's a traditional art form, we do have philosophical meanings, we have the cultural significance. So philosophically, the threshold is the boundary between the inner and the outer. So the inner is the inside of the home, which is sacred, and the outer is this mundane landscape, motion kind of thing. So we have a philosophical meaning attached to the threshold. And culturally, the figures represent, you know, objects, animals, birds that are sacred in the culture. And there are certain columns that are drawn for rituals and festivals. Certain columns that are very simple are used for everyday, you know, drawing in front of their thresholds. So how do you actually draw it? Very quickly. Many of these figures begin with a grid of dots, and we call them pulli in the Tamil language. And the configuration of the grid, if you can imagine, determines how big the figure is, what kind of figure or design it is. And so this is a visual of that, and you can see the lady holding a dish which has the rice flour, and then, you know, drawing it. Now, some of the columns can be drawn with the lines connecting the dots. Some of the figures can be drawn with lines going around the dots. So if you can take a moment to look at these set of figures, these are the ones that go around the dots. And then on the right side, notice the figures. Of course, the first one has the dot inside, but that's just an aesthetic to make it beautiful. But the rest of the figures, notice that the lines join the dots. And then you also notice symmetry. You also notice rotation. All of these mathematical properties excite these computer scientists, because the computer scientists then, a group of computer scientists, this was back in 1950s, at a Madras Christian college. Now, I went to Women's Christian College back in India, but there's another one that's called Madras Christian College, created the bridge between Kolam and computer science, again by using picture languages. So I hope you remember the turtle moves, the picture languages, and very quickly I'm going to tell you that the computer scientists observed, she's telling me it's 2 minutes, observed how the women actually drew those designs. They observed the steps, and what they noticed was that they started by drawing the closed curves and then repeated the closed curves. But while repeating, they also rotated it. Do you see that? And then the same thing they observed with other figures, like the big figure on the rightmost side, that's the Kolam design, is made up of these smaller copies of, you know, the basic units. And so these gave the computer scientists an idea as to how to do it using picture languages. So I'm not going to go through each one, but you can see that they created 7 Kolam moves. Remember we called it turtle moves? So they called it Kolam moves. And then the difference between turtle move and Kolam is turtle was all linear, remember the lines? But in Kolam you need curves. And so what they did was they said, okay, cap F is move, drawing a line. R1 is make a half turn. R2 is make a U-turn. R3 is a loop. So they gave the commands, and these curves can be formed. And my last slide on the Kolam, how did they create this Kolam drawing? If you remember, this is made up of copies of the little ones. And so the little ones can be, again, I'm not going through all these rules, but now you get the idea, is that the starting string, which is this big string, when you actually apply the commands, look like this. Because remember, it was half turn, go straight, loop, go straight, loop. And so those are the commands, and then you get the basic unit drawn, and all you do is apply the rewriting rules over and over, and you get the figure. Right? And so, just to conclude, I asked ChatGPT, how do you create these, pictures and text? And so, obviously, it gave me this entire response. But a part of it, which I've highlighted, says that rewriting rules are the basic for generative AI. It learns the patterns and give it rewriting rules, and it keeps generating the outputs. And so I was very happy when I read the ChatGPT response. I said, yay, I taught my students a few years ago how to do this. But thank you so much for listening. Thank you.
I want to thank our panelists for awesome subject matter. Great. Right? So, President McGuire, I'm not sure how much more time we have in this segment.
We're going to have to wrap and move to the next session.
Okay,
so if you have questions, come up and talk to the panel.
Okay. There you have it.
Thank you
Thank
so
you,
much,
guys.
everybody.